Cloak knew that this mission had ultimately been a disaster. Yes, they had eventually succeeded in stopping the monster, but it had been a costly victory. The final death count had been just over 24 casualties, with only a quarter of that being guards. There were twice as many people who had been wounded, and the town's infrastructure had suffered a lot as well. Half the buildings had been reduced to rubble, and Frost had been forced to bring down one of the town's water towers. All in all, a mess. Dice had met with the city lord late that night, and while the man had expressed gratitude, he also hadn't offered to pay for their services. It wasn't a completely unfair scenario. They had technically failed, but it would set the guild back significantly. "Hey, Cloak, go gather the team. We need to start introductions and all that," Dice called. The man barely seemed fazed by last night's events, despite being the one who would suffer the most from it. Little seemed to bother him, which was likely why he made a good leader. Cloak nodded, then went to fetch the team. They had all spent the night in the town's small huts, which were made for emergencies. They had seen good use last night. Dozens of people had suddenly lost their homes and now found themselves needing the simplistic shelters around. Luckily for them, the mask shop had remained untouched. Many people would be visiting it today to attempt an escape from the pain of losing loved ones and livelihoods. Cloak started with Clip, knowing that the man would have a hard time waking up, as he always did after a late night. After a sufficient amount of knocking on the door, Clip drowsily called that he would be out soon. At least Frost is easy to wake up, Cloak thought with a sigh. Knowing her, she's probably already up, excited to meet the newcomers. That proved true, as only moments after Cloak knocked, Frost opened the door, looking as nice as ever, hair done just right, light makeup put on to highlight her unique eyes. She was 27, a handful of years older than Cloak's 23, but had always treated him with at least some level of respect, especially during the last year. And fortunately, it hadn't taken him long to stop feeling nervous whenever she was nearby, like he had at the beginning. "Do you want to wake up the new girl? Might be less sketchy than if I do it," he said. "Good morning to you as well, Cloak," Frost said, though it lacked the usual annoying tone she gave him when he ignored formalities. She must be really excited to meet the newcomers, Cloak thought. Frost continued. "That is probably for the best, though. You'll get the new boy then?" "Yup." "I assume you already tried to wake Clip too?" Cloak nodded. Frost sighed, mumbling to herself. He caught her saying, "Hopefully these new kids are better conversationalists than you all." Well, Cloak still didn't see a huge point to talking more than necessary. Why waste time on it? "You're just sour because it's morning and you just failed a mission," a part of him acknowledged. He tended to get even less talkative in those situations. Cloak walked over to the new boy's hut, noticing on the way that Clip still hadn't gotten up. Well, once awake, Clip had a hard time falling back asleep, so eventually he'd force himself out of bed. Cloak found the kid's hut without too much trouble. He'd memorized where everyone had gone to sleep the night before, and knocked loudly on the metal door. The boy couldn't be older than 16, but had proven himself to be useful in the fight last night. More useful than the other soldiers, at least, who had charged in blindly, not even realizing that their attacks were fruitless until a solid half of them had been wounded or killed. If Dice and his team hadn't been there, the monster would have had no problem wiping out the entire town. The metal door opened, and Cloak found himself face to face with the young man. His skin was more tan than most people's, though it was nowhere near as dark as Clip's. His hair seemed deliberately messy, with the hair jutting off into spikes in a seemingly random fashion. The youth was somewhat short, but his eyes were sharp, and he seemed to have the gait of someone practiced in the art of battle. Whether the kid would last long fighting monsters or not, Cloak couldn't determine. "Grab whatever of your things you want to bring," Cloak said. "We'll do some quick introductions, then leave this town before the people start to dread our company." It always happened when they failed a mission. Just as people would cheer for them when they saved their town, they judged them when they made mistakes. It was just part of being in a monster hunting guild. The kid nodded. "I've already packed. Not that I had much anyway." Right. He was a newcomer. He'd probably be equipped with some clothing and tools, but little else. Cloak did notice with interest that the kid had kept the spear he'd found last night and had put it next to a sack of other belongings. The guards probably wouldn't like that, but they wouldn't complain. Vocally, at least. In their eyes, the kid would have earned the spear by using it to defend their homes. That opinion would be soured by the boy deciding to leave the town, but the honor that the guards had would still hold strong enough not to stop him. Cloak waved for the kid to follow, and he did so without complaint. Both of the newcomers were younger than Cloak this time, which was a nice surprise. Maybe they'd treat him with some respect off the bat because of that. He was technically the co-leader of the guild, as he'd been in it longer than Frost and Clip, so if something were to happen to Dice, he would take over. However, he was also young, and Dice had a reputation for being reliable. Dice had been a guild leader for at least a decade before Cloak had joined 7 years ago. Thinking back, Cloak realized he had been around the age of this new kid when he'd first joined the guild. The two of them reached the group without any trouble, and Cloak was pleased to see that Clip had finally gotten up and joined them. He hadn't bothered to clean up his short hair, but he'd woken up. Frost and the new young woman were also already there, and the new woman had a pack of her belongings as well. "Well," Dice said with his customary grin, "today's the day you two officially join our guild. I'm the leader here. Dice is the name, and I'll be the one in charge of training, getting bounties for the team, and pretty much keeping the rest of you from getting yourselves killed. I'd appreciate it if you would all try and survive, as I'd hate to have your deaths on my conscience any time soon." Dice gestured for Clip to introduce himself. "I'm Clip. Glad to see you newcomers here, as it means I am no longer the rookie, eh? If you need help with something simple, like lifting a boulder to find a better sleeping spot, then let me know," Clip said with his usual strong accent, overemphasizing the vowels in each word. He was a tall man, easily a foot taller than Cloak, who was fairly tall himself. His height, dark skin, and overall bulk made him more distinguishable than anyone else in the guild. Frost smiled as she began to introduce herself. "I'm Frost. I'm in charge of making the potions that our group uses. Acid, explosives, even general medicine. If you need anything from me, don't hesitate to ask." "You're the one who made the flammable paste for my arrows then, right?" the young woman asked. Frost smiled again, though this one seemed more genuine than the ones she usually gave. "That's right. I'm also the one who turned the water in the tower into a flammable goop. Took a special combination of—" She was cut off as Dice coughed loudly, and a small blush came across her face. "Sorry, I tend to ramble on about that stuff." Cloak noted how terribly unfair it was that Dice was the only one who could ever get a rise out of Frost. "Cloak, you're up," Dice barked. "Right. Well, I'm Cloak." He hesitated. Everyone else had done something more to give their role in the group. Trying to think quick and trying very hard to ignore the eyes of the new girl, he continued, "If Dice somehow gets himself killed, I'm the one in charge of keeping you all alive, so you all better help keep him from doing anything too crazy." He wasn't sure if he meant it as a joke or not. Was it even funny? Ruination, why was humor so difficult? It really didn't help that the new girl was watching. He forced his face to remain completely passive so he wouldn't embarrass himself. Thankfully, Dice began speaking again. "Well, now that you know us, time to introduce yourselves. Arrow Girl, you first." "All right," the young woman said nervously. Ruination, but she was gorgeous. Not over the top like Frost, but simply so. Her hair was in a braid, and her eyes were kind. "No, stop that, you idiot." Cloak forced himself to stop staring at her. She was pretty. He acknowledged that. No need to let his mind wander any further than that. He found himself glad for his mask, though, as it hid the blush that rose onto his face. "Well," she continued, and Cloak purposefully focused on her words. "My name is Wait. Dice cut in, holding his hand out to stop her. "We don't give out our real names here. I forgot to tell you that. Today the old you is dead, and only this new version has any value. It's all very symbolic. Anyway, you need a new name, preferably something that can be said quickly." "Oh," she said, blushing. Cloak did not notice how cute that looked on her. Maybe, no." "How about Arrow?" Clip said from the side. "Since you used arrows in the fight last night rather than a sword or spear. Good choice, eh? Staying far away from the dangerous monster and slowly killing it from afar." The new girl's blush seemed to grow, obviously uncomfortable with being put on the spot so suddenly. Cloak felt a stab of pity for her. "Arrow sounds good," Cloak said, hoping to take a bit of the pressure off her. Then, realizing that she might not like the name, kept speaking. If you think it's good, that is. The comment seemed to make her squirm even more. It isn't bad, just, I don't know, this is kind of a big decision, she said, looking at the ground. So much for being helpful. Arrow should work, Dice cut in. It really isn't that big of a decision. You didn't put any thought into your birth name, did you? So maybe overthinking things is the real danger. Welcome to the team, Arrow. The girl, Arrow, nodded, still looking at the ground. Thanks, she muttered. Now for you, Dice said, gesturing to the young man. You've had a bit of time to think about it. What are you thinking? How about Saber? The youth said, gesturing with his hands. That sounds menacing, right? Hey, Saber, cut left. Or, Saber, what are you doing? Yeah, that sounds nice. Nope, name's been taken, Dice said casually, looking over his shoulder. Cloak glanced back there himself, but didn't see anything. Sometimes things caught Dice's attention that no one else noticed. Taken, the young man said with reluctance. Are there more people in the group? Dice didn't seem interested in answering, so Cloak stepped up. Saber was someone in the guild about a year ago. He died in one of our hunts. Wait, so why can't I have the name? Respect. You don't take someone else's name. If you do, it just seems like you are trying to replace them. The boy huffed, looking down at his feet for a moment before saying another name. How about Enigma? Way too long, Cloak responded dryly. Geyser? Already used. Hound? That's ridiculous. And already taken. It was ridiculous when that blazing man used it, too. The youth huffed. How about Buzzkill? Or have you already taken that name yourself? Very funny. Maybe we should call you Jester if you're going to play the fool card. That's actually not bad, Dice cut in. Jester. I like it. Welcome to the team, Jester. Cloak blinked. He hadn't meant it seriously, but the youth seemed thoughtful. That actually isn't bad. I'll take it, the kid said with a shrug. Yeah, Jester is a pretty nice name. He didn't thank Cloak for coming up with it, though Cloak supposed that he didn't deserve any praise. Well, if the boy liked it, then who was Cloak to complain? We'll head back to our fort, get you two equipped, and go from there then, Dice said, grinning. Then he put his arms around the newcomers. Trust me, you've just entered into a very rewarding career path. From the looks on their faces, Cloak didn't think the reassurance was very effective.